The issue of Sunday or Saturday worship is really easy to settle. Are you a born-again Christian or are you a Jew? If you are a born-again Christian, a New Testament Christian, then there is no argument, biblically and contextually. The church was born on a Sunday, on Pentecost. Pentecost always falls on a Sunday. Check out the requirements for the Feast of Pentecost in Leviticus. So the Church of Jesus was born on a Sunday. Thus, the Holy Spirit was given on a Sunday. What were the early believers doing on that Sunday when the church was born? They were gathered for worship on a Sunday, waiting for the gift from heaven promised by Jesus. The first Christian sermon was preached by the first Christian pastor of the first and the newly born Christian church by Peter on a Sunday. Over 3,000 people were saved and added to the church on a Sunday. What else is significant about Sunday? Well, Jesus entered Jerusalem on the last week of his life on a Sunday. He received worship from the crowds on that Sunday. 1 week later, 7 days later, the number 7 being an indisputable biblical number of perfection and completion, 7 days later, Jesus rose from the grave on a Sunday, the first day of the week. 1 week later, on a Sunday, Jesus revealed himself to his disciples as they were gathered together. It was on a Sunday, the Lord's Day, when John was given the book of Revelation by Jesus himself. John was, quote, in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. In the Spirit? That is, he was worshiping on the Lord's Day. The New Testament declares that Jesus fulfills all the law. It also declares that Jesus is our Sabbath rest. Jesus is the Sabbath. If you are in him, if you are born again, you are keeping the Sabbath, regardless of what day you worship upon. The early disciples met on the first day of the week for preaching, for worship, and for taking up the collection for the saints. Paul preached to the early Christians on Sundays. We know that from the Bible, from the New Testament. So again, if you are a Jew or a believer who says he wants to hold to Jewish tradition, then you can worship on Saturday. But if you proclaim that by doing so you are somehow more righteous before God, then you are simply espousing the old Judaizer heresy that Jesus fought against, and almost all the New Testament writers spoke against, especially the Apostle Paul. Someone may say, well, what about the fourth commandment of the 10 Commandments? Again, the context is that the 10 Commandments were given to the Jews in the wilderness at Mount Sinai. They were God's commandments for his chosen people in the wilderness and in the Promised Land. Now the principles of the commandments still hold for God's people, and the specifics do as well, unless the specific of it has taken a deeper fulfillment in Jesus Christ. He did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. The New Testament is clear. The Sabbath law, Jesus fulfilled and took to a whole new level. You see, Jesus is our sacrifice. He is our lamb. We don't sacrifice lambs in the temple anymore either. The law requires it, but why don't we? Because we're not Jews. We are Christians. Our faith is in Jesus Christ. He's our sacrifice. He's our lamb. He's our sin offering. And he is our Sabbath. I choose to worship corporately with Christians, with New Testament believers, on the day upon which the Spirit was given, on the day upon which the church was born, the day upon which the first believers were added to the church, the day upon which the first Christian sermon was preached, and the day that the early Christians met for worship and preaching, and the day upon which Jesus rose from the dead, and the day upon which the book of Revelation was given to John. This really should not be a hard issue to rectify biblically and contextually, unless, of course, you deliberately choose to cling to the law, which cannot save. I will cling to Jesus, my Sabbath. So this old, tired argument that Sunday worship was established by the Emperor Constantine, surely he made a declaration like that in the days when the Catholic Church was being swallowed up by the Roman government. Of course he did. But that's not where Sunday worship began. It began with Jesus himself. It continued with the birth of the church, the early Christians, the first Christian preachers, the Apostle Paul, and John on the island of Patmos. That is the biblical truth. Again, I will cling to Jesus, who is my Sabbath.